Well, Famitsu info just leaked again, and it seems like they're going to be doing coverage on this game every week for the next few weeks, so looks like these videos may end up being a bit of a regular thing. This week, it's new classes, a revamped weapon triangle, and we finally get an idea of how weapons work. So, let's get started. I'm not actually sure what to talk about first. Maybe I should go with the biggest one, the weapon triangle editions. Now remember all the way back when this game was first revealed? When we saw this shot that seemed to show that swords now had a weapon triangle advantage against bows? Well, turns out that this actually is a game mechanic now. They have revamped the weapon triangle, although don't worry, the original triangle of swords beat axes, axes beat lances, lances beat swords is still intact. However, they have actually added in some additional elements. Basically, every point of the triangle now has two weapon types. Magic and bows have officially joined the triangle, and there's a new type of weapon added too, called hidden weapons, which are apparently knives or shurikens. These weapons have 1 to 2 range, much like magic. They're apparently quite weak, but can lower enemy stats. Now, the new positions on the triangle are swords and magic, beats axes and bows, beats lances and hidden weapons, beats swords. This is actually very interesting and presents a lot of more, new tactical opportunities for these weapon types. Seeing magic being reduced to just a generic thing that never had any weapon triangle advantages really was kind of annoying for a few games, so I'm glad to see that magic finally gets in on the action. Now, this does seem to confirm that Fire, Thunder, and Wind and the Magic Trinity isn't exactly coming back in this game, which is a little disappointing, but I do like that at least magic gets in on the weapon triangle. It's now strong against axes and bows. Being good against bows actually does make a lot of sense, considering that mages usually tend to beat archers by getting close to them and abusing the fact that magic can attack from close range as well as from a distance. I really like this new weapon triangle because a lot of these advantages actually make logical sense when you think about them. Swords beating bows, well, sword users generally close in with archers pretty quickly and cut them to pieces in melee. Bows being good against lances and hidden weapons is actually kind of interesting because in a lot of other strategy games that I played, especially ones that I played when I was a lot younger, like Age of Empires, bows were good against spear users. So this brings back a lot of nice memories for me, although it was probably unintentional. Bows beating throwing knives does make a lot of sense too, considering that bows do have a considerable range advantage on them. Hidden weapons beating swords also makes a lot of logical sense, because, no matter how skilled you are with a blade, someone could easily sneak up on you with a concealed knife and just stab you, which, yeah, I do like that advantage. It does make a lot of sense. The only one that's a bit weird to me is lances now beating magic. Hidden weapons beating magic, I guess, does make some kind of sense as well, but lances beating magic does feel a little bit weird. Axes beating hidden weapons could mostly be chalked up to, well, axe users usually being physically strong enough to shrug off getting hit by just a couple of knives or something and then just, smashing the enemy. But overall, I really do like these changes. It doesn't mess with the old weapon triangle, and it adds a lot of new elements. I really think that's what they're going for with this game, because they're doing something quite similar with a lot of the classes. So hidden weapons are a new class of weapons that are used by ninjas, which we kind of thought. Back when I saw that ninjas were revealed to be in this game, well, presumably, this is actually the first time they've officially revealed the class, but we saw some characters who were pretty obviously ninjas. You can see a green-haired ninja up there, right near the enemy soldier's name. When I knew that ninjas were going to be in this game, I wondered whether knives would be coming back, and it looks like they are. The other classes that use the hidden weapon type are kind of interesting. Maids and Butlers. We knew that maids like Felicia would be playable characters, but we didn't realise they would actually be a maid class. A lot of people assume they'd just be clerics. Nope, turns out that maids are actually a class, and so are butlers. Two of the characters in this shot here might look familiar to you as well. Of course, the first is Felicia, who we've known since the very beginning. The second character might be kind of familiar though. He's the guy at the very far right of the Hoshido box art, the guy I previously assumed would be Hoshido's Jagen character. But considering that he's a butler, I'm guessing he'd more be aligned with Noah. This character is apparently named Joker. Yeah. Let's just hope he doesn't go on a homicidal rampage and kill everyone. But yes, he is of the butler class. Maids and butlers use knives and staves. And when I first heard that, I was like, aha! I called it! I called it! I called it! When the information about the maid class was first revealed, this was yesterday before we actually got the full Famitsu scan, I was thinking, you know what, I get the feeling that maids are going to use knives and staves. Yep, turns out I was exactly right. Both maids and butlers are kind of, I guess, like tricksters in Awakening. They heal with staves and do damage with knives, although their damage-dealing abilities are supposedly not all that great. Knives do, however, have additional effects that I'll be covering later, but it looks like these characters are going to be primarily healers who can at least sort of fight in combat a little bit as well. The interesting thing to note here is that both Felicia and Joker are listed as being allies in both campaigns. And that is very, very interesting because, as you know, Joker appeared on the Hoshido box art, yet apparently he's not Hoshido exclusive. I guess the same could be said of Felicia too. Now, one of these characters is not like the others, the one at the bottom of this set of three. This is, yeah, it would be Gunther. His name looks German to me, but this guy is very obviously the purple-haired knight on the Nor box art that I talked about in the last video. And apparently his class is in fact Great Knight. There was a bit of a hilarious mistranslation at one point where people were calling him Great Butler, but sadly that was not to be. He is a Great Knight just like Frederick. It seems like he will be filling the Jagen role for at least the Nor campaign, but as for Hoshido, I'm really not sure. They say a lot about characters who are playable in both campaigns, and I'll talk more about that later because we have other characters to cover who fit that description. But let's just say I was pretty much right about a lot of the things I suspected about this guy. Him being an older knight-type character who, at least on one route, will act as a Jagen, and being a Great Knight, that's the class I kinda guessed that he would be. Ninjas, being trained by me. If you want to pass, you listen well. Yep, we have ninjas! This is a class that also uses hidden weapons, in this case shurikens, which appear to be the Hoshido version of knives. They can attack from 1 to 2 range, and from the looks of things their weapons increase speed, as well as debuffing enemies that they hit. Presumably this class is going to have very high speed. I guess they'd be kind of like thieves and assassins. In fact, they might even promote to assassin for all we know. But the interesting thing was we actually have a few characters revealed who are of this class. Suzukaze, Saizor, who we've seen in trailers before, and Kagero. These three are all ninjas, but interestingly, Suzukaze, the top one, the one with the green hair, is playable on both routes, while the bottom two are Hoshido exclusive. Kind of strange that one ninja would be both sides, while the others would be exclusive to Hoshido, but yeah, interesting. Now, the other cool thing about this is Suzukaze and Saizor. Now, remember before I mentioned that there were ninjas on the map with red and green hair? And I was suspecting that maybe they'd be Hoshido's version of the Cain and Abel archetypes. Well, guess what? I called it! I called it again! I called it again! It looks like, yes, Suzukaze and Saizor are in fact the Cain and Abel of Hoshido. At least all the evidence points to it. Apparently they're brothers, and they have contrasting personalities. Suzukaze, the green-haired one, is calm and polite, while Saizor, the red-haired one, is hot-blooded and easily fired up. That certainly sounds very Cain and Abel-like, doesn't it? But that does beg the question. They're apparently twin brothers, and yet one of them will be with you on either side, but one of them's Hoshido exclusive. Does that mean that if you're playing the Nor route, it's possible these two brothers could end up as enemies? Wow, that is an interesting prospect, and that's why this whole route split thing is really intriguing. It's probably going to feel very painful when they inevitably have to fight each other, though. Now, the third is a female ninja named Kagero. Now, when I first heard about Kagero, we hadn't seen them, and we didn't know if they were male or female. However, I immediately concluded they must be insanely awesome, because knowing Japanese, their name most likely translates as Shadow Wolf. Yeah, that is possibly the most awesome name ever. Seriously, Shadow Wolf. That's pretty awesome. Suzukaze's name might translate as Bellwind, which doesn't sound nearly as cool as Shadow Wolf, and I'm actually not sure about Sizor's. We don't know much about her character except that she often acts as restraint for the more reckless Sizor. Interestingly enough, I wouldn't have really known that Sizor was a reckless type by looking at his dialogue in the first trailers, but yeah, looks like just initial dialogue can be deceiving. He didn't really say much back there. So, yeah, these characters have very interesting prospects, especially Kagero. She's shaping up to be one of my favourite characters. Honestly, if I was playing the Hoshido route, I'm pretty sure she'd probably be my waifu, because seriously, that name is amazing. Next, let's talk about the effects of weapons, which have been gone into in more detail. They alluded to in the earlier Famitsu that even though weapons are unbreakable now, there'll still be a lot of strategy in deciding which weapon is right for the job. And that's because we now know that weapons grant stat modifications. Now, I'm going to draw your attention to this very old screenshot that I showed you all the way back in my second analysis video. Back there, I was wondering what the deal was with those green numbers on the stats and one of the stats being red. I was wondering what that meant. Usually, I'd assume that would mean that some stats were raised and some were lowered, but I was wondering what the source of that was. I was thinking the source might be the weapon, because quite often the Lord's personal weapon in Fire Emblem games generally gives some very small stat boosts. Turns out that I was right, but it's not exclusive to the Lord's unique weapon. Every weapon in the game is going to have some kind of additional effect or stat modifier, and we have some examples of these already. So, based on what was revealed in the leak, bronze weapons, from the looks of things, can't critical, but lower the chance of enemies criticaling. I am a little sad they brought back the whole bronze weapons can't critical mechanic from Radiant Dawn. That was really irritating to me and was only useful on Jagan characters, just making sure they didn't kill things so that they could just weaken stuff. But still, not being able to critical is a really crippling drawback, and that makes it so that if bronze weapons really are the only weapons characters can use at an E rank, that's going to be very, very crippling. That'll also mean less voice acting in the early game, because no one will be able to critical. So yeah, very annoying. Lowering the enemy's critical by 10 could be useful early on, later in the game not so much, but early on that could be a huge boon, because that early on some enemies have like 5% critical or something, and that can very easily kill someone. Iron weapons seem to have no special properties, but for example, a steel sword lowers evasion by 5 and lowers the double attack threshold by 3. What that would mean is, if this game operates on Awakening's double attack threshold, instead of needing 5 higher speed than the enemy to double, you would need 8 higher speed. So it looks like weapon weight isn't actually back, but it's being mimicked in some of these stat boosts, like with steel weapons. So just like in earlier games, steel weapons are powerful but harder to double with. Silver swords apparently lower critical evade by 5, and after using, strength and skill decrease by 2 until the next turn. I admit that with silver weapons not having limited uses, they would have to mitigate them somewhat to make them not too overpowered. I get the feeling that some of these reductions, though, won't be so major later in the game. I mean, -2 strength and skill, with really high stats, that's not going to make much of a difference at all. Critical evade -5 could be annoying, though. Brave Sword works the way that it used to, allowing for 2 consecutive attacks, but it lowers defense and resistance by 4. That could actually be pretty significant. That sort of amounts to 4 extra damage from the enemy regardless of what weapon type they're using, so at least they're kind of mitigating Brave weapons, because they were very, very overpowered in Awakening. Guarding weapons, remember how I said earlier that hidden weapons could apparently debuff enemies? Well, we now know that for a fact. So, basically what some of these weapons do, According to a certain screenshot, Suzukaze's Iron Shuriken boosts his speed by 2, while reducing the enemy's magic by 2, defense by 3, and resistance by 3 until the next turn. So, this actually looks to be a very interesting mechanic. We actually have weapons that can debuff enemies. Really, that hasn't been done in a Fire Emblem game before, actually lowering an enemy's stats. The closest we ever got were the Hex and Anathema skills in Awakening, and also some of the Mastery skills in Radiant Dawn. There are a few skills that had effects like halving the enemy's accuracy or halving the enemy's magic for 1 turn. The problem was, those skills also tripled your damage, so very often the debuff effect was pretty much never visible because the enemy would be dead anyway, so having weaker weapons that also inflict stat debuffs, that's a very interesting mechanic. One that's never been in a Fire Emblem before, so I'm really excited to try it out. Another thing to note is that apparently the Hoshido and Nor weapons are going to be different from each other. The Nor weapons are going to be more standard and kind of balanced, whereas some of the Hoshido weapons, for example, apparently their Naginatas, their equivalent of Lancers, have less might, but increase your defense and resistance, so looks like both sides are going to have their own interesting different types of weapons. Final thing to talk about here is some new characters that have been revealed. Here we have a Dark Mage from Nor called Nyx. Let's just hope she doesn't try and destroy the world. She does seem to be a character that we saw on the map in Nor earlier on, so yeah, I was guessing there'd be some kind of a Dark Mage who sort of looked like this. Thankfully, she doesn't look too similar to Tharia, so at least they're not totally ripping her off. Been confirmed that she does promote to Sorcerer, but if you look at her stats there, you'll notice that she has, or if you can read Japanese, you'll notice that she has high magic and speed, but very low skill, luck, and defense. Now, the defense is very interesting, because in previous games, mainly Shadow Dragon and Awakening, Dark Mages tended to have very good defense. So, either this character is a very atypical Dark Mage, or Dark Mages are no longer more defensive. That or Dark Mages could just be the Nor exclusive counterpart of regular mages, so I guess they make them more like regular mages then. Speaking of other new characters, we can see a shot of Nyx here, but also a very hilarious looking character who's apparently a brave hero. This guy, well, yeah, he looks interesting. For some reason, I'm getting a serious Captain Quark vibe, or like, you know, those over-the-top parodies of heroic characters. Stand back, citizen! Captain Hero shall handle this! Is it awesome in here, or is it just me? Yeah, I can kind of picture him having some kind of personality like that. But yeah, this guy's apparently the Norian equivalent of a hero, or just a renamed version of the hero class, but he looks pretty hilarious, so yeah, we'll have to see what his personality turns out to be like. The interesting thing here is, these characters are shown as representing particular classes, but according to the bottom screenshots there, apparently classes actually have base stats in luck now. This is actually new to this game, because normally luck was never increased by class, it was just something that characters, like, had naturally. So, yeah, classes apparently have base amounts of luck now, or base luck growths as well, so that could be interesting. On the Hoshido side, we can see here we finally get an official portrait for Linka, the female fighter, or Oni in this case. Basically a fighter, but apparently the class has very high strength and defense. But according to those stats, the class also has terrible skill, so you pay a price for hitting hard and being able to take a lot of damage. But she does look like an interesting character to use, and her design looks like something out of Orkami, which looks really interesting. On the right, we have Sakura, and Sakura appears to be healing with a certain kind of Hoshidan staff equivalent, making these talismans appear. The talismans are interesting because people suspect that the Hoshido equivalent of magic tomes are talismans, like we've seen briefly in a few earlier trailers of this game. So maybe Sakura could be able to use magic? I'm not sure, unless the talismans just appear for staves too. But her stats do look fairly balanced, like you'd expect for a pretty typical cleric, really. We also got to look at the portrait of someone else, a cavalier named Cyrus from Nor. Now, I know that the name tag says Kamui there, that's because Kamui's acting as the support unit here. This portrait, even though it does look kind of like Kamui, actually belongs to Cyrus. Now, A cavalier named Cyrus from Nor, I think we've actually seen him before. Remember this guy that I pointed out in an earlier trailer? I'm pretty sure that he's Cyrus based on the hair color. And I think I was also right in guessing that this guy will be playable in both campaigns, because I saw him as a blue unit on the map in 2 separate instances. Like right there, just left from the green-haired ninja in this very obviously Hoshidon map, but he also appeared on a Nor map. Now, they did confirm this guy would be playable in both routes, but this looks to be a very early game Hoshidon map, which means I'm guessing that this guy actually would join you on the Hoshidon side quite early. Maybe he's one of your first recruitable enemies, that would be my guess at least. Now, yes, regarding those characters who are going to be playable on both routes, I have some speculation about this. They say just that the characters are going to be playable on both routes, but they don't actually really say when they'd be playable or how high their levels would be. Now, what I think this means is that while they would be playable on both routes, their roles might end up being very different in terms of when you get them in the story. For example, take Gunter, the Great Knight. He's probably going to be a more typical Jagan-type character in the Nor storyline, but perhaps in Hoshidon you don't recruit him until much later, and maybe he acts like Decel from Sacred Stones, a powerful enemy general who defects to your side. Also begs the question of just how Suzukaze, the ninja who'll be on your side in either route, is going to work. So, is he going to be a late-game recruitable character? Will he be a recruitable enemy and optional? Or will he always join you on the Nor side, regardless of, whether we're able to recruit him or not? We don't know, but I do get the feeling that characters who are playable in both storylines will actually have very different roles in those storylines. Some might join early in one, but join very, very late in another, and others might be the opposite. So that has very interesting prospects, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they handle these characters. Also, plus ninjas! Be assured that if I do a playthrough of this game, I will definitely be using one of these ninjas. Now, chances are I'm probably going to use Suzukaze on Nor, and definitely Kagero on Hoshidon. In fact, if I have a male avatar on the Hoshidon route, which will again be up to the gods of fate, but if I do, she, depending on if there are S supports in this game, might be marrying my male avatar, I'm not sure. Either that, or I'll pair them with Aqua if the story implies Aqua more heavily. I'm not really sure, but Kagero is pretty awesome.